The stars looked peaceful through the observation window of the Meridian. Captain Jacob Hayes stood with his hands behind his back, watching the endless dark between distant suns. 5,000 people slept in cold storage behind him, dreaming of their new home on New Terra. The colony ship had been traveling for 3 months now, and they were only 2 weeks away from their destination. Jacob had made this journey twice before. He knew every sound the ship made, every hum of the engines, every click of the life support systems, so when something changed in the background noise, he noticed immediately. His hand moved to the communication panel. "Bridge, this is Hayes. Are we picking up anything unusual on sensors?" The response came back after a moment.
"Negative, Captain."
"All systems normal. Wait, hold on. We're getting something now." Multiple contacts incoming fast. Jacob's stomach dropped. The Meridian was not a warship. She had basic shields and a few defensive weapons, but nothing that could stand up to a real threat. "Battle stations. Wake the security team. Send an emergency transmission to Earth with our coordinates." The bridge crew moved quickly, but Jacob knew it was already too late. Through the window, he saw them. 3 massive ships, each easily 5 times the size of the Meridian, appeared from nowhere. Their hulls were dark green and covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow with their own light. "Captain, they're hailing us. Translation coming through now." A voice filled the bridge, cold and harsh. "Human vessel, you will cease movement. You will power down all weapons and shields. You will prepare for boarding. Resistance will result in the destruction of your ship and the death of all aboard." Jacob looked at his crew, young men and women who had signed up to help build a new world, not to fight a war. He knew what his duty was, but he also knew what the right choice was. "Send the transmission to Earth first. Make sure they know what happened here. Then power down weapons and shields." The communication officer's fingers flew across her console. "Transmission sent, Captain. Earth will receive it in 47 hours. Good. Now let's hope whoever these people are, they're reasonable." They were not reasonable. The aliens who boarded the Meridian were unlike anything humanity had encountered before. They walked on 2 legs like humans, but there the similarity ended. Their skin was covered in dark green scales. Their eyes were yellow with vertical slits, and their mouths were filled with sharp teeth. They moved with a predator's grace, carrying weapons that hummed with dangerous energy. The leader of the boarding party looked at Jacob with something that might have been contempt. "You are the commander of this vessel?" "I am Captain Jacob Hayes of the United Earth Colonial Service." "Who are you and what do you want with my ship?" The alien made a sound that might have been laughter. "I am Strike Commander Valen of the Krell Empire. What we want is simple. Your species is now property of the Empire. You will be transported to processing facilities and assigned work details. Any resistance will be punished with immediate execution." Jacob felt his blood turn to ice. "You can't be serious. We're sentient beings, not animals. We have rights, we have families, we have—" The alien's weapon came up fast, the barrel pressing against Jacob's forehead. "You have nothing. Your species exists at the pleasure of the Krell Empire. Be grateful we find you useful enough to keep alive." The aliens moved through the ship with practiced efficiency. They used devices that sent out waves of stunning energy, knocking out the entire crew without killing them. Jacob tried to fight, tried to warn his people, but the neural disruptor hit him like a hammer. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the alien commander standing over him, those yellow eyes filled with cold satisfaction. When Jacob woke, everything had changed. He was lying on a cold metal floor in a large holding pen. Around him, thousands of humans were waking up, confused and terrified. The walls were transparent on one side, showing a massive facility that stretched as far as the eye could see. Through the walls, he could see other pens, other humans, and aliens walking between them with casual indifference. A woman near him started screaming. Others joined in, their voices rising in panic. Jacob forced himself to stand, though his body felt like it was made of lead. "Everyone, stay calm. We need to stay calm and figure out where we are." "I can tell you where we are," said a voice behind him. Jacob turned to see a young woman with dark hair and determined eyes. She wore the uniform of a ship's doctor. "I'm Linda Pierce. I was traveling with my daughter to New Terra. I've been awake longer than you. We're on a planet called Drekar Prime. And from what I've overheard, we're now slaves of something called the Krell Empire." The word hung in the air like poison. Slaves. In the 23rd century, humanity had left such things behind, or so they thought. The transparent wall suddenly became opaque and a massive image appeared. It was a Krell, but this one was older, with more elaborate markings on its scales. When it spoke, its voice boomed through the holding pen. Humans, you are now subjects of the Krell Empire. For 3,000 years, we have ruled over 40 star systems. For 3,000 years, lesser species have served us. You are the newest addition to our empire. You will work in our mines, our factories, our research facilities. You will be obedient. You will be useful. Or you will die. The image changed, showing humans working in massive underground mines, their bodies thin and exhausted. It showed research labs where humans were strapped to tables while Krell scientists studied them. It showed punishment areas where humans who disobeyed were killed in front of others as examples. This is your future, the Krell continued. Accept it, and some of you may live long enough to see your children born into service. Resist and you will only find pain. The image disappeared and the wall became transparent again. Immediately, Krell guards began entering the holding pen. They carried devices that looked like metal collars. As they approached the humans, their purpose became clear. Linda grabbed Jacob's arm. They're going to put control collars on us. I've seen them in use. They cause pain when triggered. The Krell use them to control their slaves. Jacob watched as the first humans tried to resist. The Krell guards simply pressed buttons on their wrist devices and the humans fell to the ground, screaming in agony. The collars were already on them, already active. The guards had put them on while the humans were unconscious. We can't fight this, Linda said quietly. Not now, not here. But we can survive. We can remember. And maybe somehow we can find a way to send word to Earth. Jacob touched the collar around his own neck, feeling the cold metal against his skin. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he remembered sending that final transmission before the Meridian was boarded. Earth would know what happened. Earth would know that humanity had been attacked, enslaved, taken from the stars they were trying to reach. The question was, what would Earth do about it? As the Krell guards began separating humans into groups, breaking up families and dividing the strong from the weak, Jacob made a silent promise. He would survive this. He would find a way to resist. And someday, somehow, the Krell would pay for what they had done. The harvest had begun, but the Krell had no idea what kind of crop they were reaping. 3 months had passed since the Meridian's crew arrived on Drakkar Prime. 3 months of brutal labor, terrible conditions, and constant fear. Jacob worked in mine shafts 14 hours a day, digging precious metals from the planet's crust while Krell overseers watched with weapons ready. The collar around his neck was a constant reminder of his status. It could deliver pain with just the press of a button, pain so intense that grown men would beg for death. Jacob had seen it happen too many times. He had learned to keep his head down, to work without complaint, to blend into the background, but he had also been watching, learning, planning. In the deep parts of the mine, where the rock walls were thick and the tunnels twisted in complex patterns, Jacob discovered something important. The control collars had a weakness. They needed direct line of sight from the Krell control stations to work properly. In the deepest tunnels, there were spots where the signal could not reach. It was not much, but it was something. Greg Murphy had been a Marine before signing up for the colony mission. He was built like a tank with broad shoulders and hands that looked like they could crush stone. He worked in the same mine as Jacob, and over the weeks, the two men had become allies. There are dead zones in Sector 12, Greg whispered during a brief rest period. The Krell allowed them 5 minutes every 4 hours, barely enough time to drink water and catch their breath. Places where these damned collars don't work. I've been testing it carefully. If we could get enough people there at once, we could organize. Jacob looked around, making sure no Krell were watching. How many people are we talking about? 50, maybe 100. All from different work crews. We would need to coordinate, get everyone to the same place at the same time, and we would need weapons. Greg's voice dropped even lower. I've been stealing tools, hiding them in the tunnels. It's not much, but it's a start. What about after? Jacob asked. Even if we take out the guards in the mine, there are thousands of Krell on this planet. Warships in orbit. We would be fighting with mining tools against an empire. Greg met his eyes steadily. Maybe. But I would rather die fighting than live like this. Wouldn't you? Jacob thought about the last 3 months. The beatings he had witnessed. The executions. The way the Krell looked at humans like they were nothing more than tools to be used and discarded. He thought about the 5,000 people from the Meridian, scattered across this planet suffering every day. Yes, he said finally, I would rather die fighting. While Jacob and Greg planned their resistance in the mines, Linda Pierce was forming her own network in the research facility. The Krell had separated her from her daughter Amy, sending Linda to work in the medical wing where human slaves treated injuries and illnesses among the workforce. The medical wing gave Linda access to information that other slaves never saw. She learned about Krell biology, their weaknesses, their technology. She stole medical supplies and hid them away. Most importantly, she found ways to communicate with different parts of the facility. One day, a young man was brought to the medical wing with severe burns from a mining accident. His name was Danny Crawford, and he worked in the facility's waste management system. While Linda treated his injuries, he told her something that made her blood run cold. They throw away bodies like garbage, Danny said, his voice shaking. Hundreds of them. Every day. People who died from the work, from the punishments, from the experiments. They don't even keep count. We're nothing to them. Just things to be used up and thrown away. Linda's hands trembled as she wrapped his burns. How many have died since we arrived? I don't know exact numbers, but from the Meridian alone, I'd guess at least 500. Maybe more. 500 dead in 3 months. Out of 5,000. If that rate continued, they would all be dead within 3 years. Linda made a decision in that moment. They could not wait for rescue. They could not hope that Earth would come in time. They had to act. She began reaching out to others carefully and quietly, building a network of resistance that spread through the facility like roots growing underground. Every person she contacted was told the same thing. Be ready, be patient, and remember that they were human beings, not slaves. On Earth, humanity was preparing for war. Admiral Richard Cole stood in the newly constructed war room, watching as holographic displays showed the construction progress of 60 new warships. The United Earth Council had authorized the largest military buildup in human history. And every nation, every colony, every resource was being devoted to a single goal, bringing their people home. Richard had been a career military officer for 30 years. He had fought pirates in the asteroid belt, protected colony ships from raiders, and commanded peacekeeping operations across a dozen worlds. But he had never commanded a fleet preparing for total war against an unknown enemy. Admiral, the Retribution is ready for final systems testing, said Commander Helen Brooks. She was young for her rank, barely 30, but she was the best engineer in the fleet. If anyone could get humanity's new technology working, it was her. What's the status on the shield generators? Richard asked. Unstable but functional. We're drawing huge amounts of power. But they'll stop energy weapons. The Krell won't be expecting that. Lieutenant Paul Martinez entered the war room carrying data pads. Sir, we've completed analysis of the Krell transmission. The one Captain Hayes sent before the Meridian was captured. We've learned their language, or at least enough to understand their communications. Richard took the data pad and read through the report. It was not encouraging. The Krell Empire was vast, ancient, and powerful. They had subjugated dozens of species over 3,000 years. Their military was enormous, their technology advanced, their tactics proven through millennia of conquest. We're outnumbered at least 50 to 1, Paul said bluntly. Even with our new ships and weapons, the odds are not good. The odds are never good when you're fighting for survival, Richard replied. What else do we know about them? They're arrogant. They expect enemies to surrender after a show of force. They've never had to fight a prolonged war because everyone they've encountered has given up. That's their weakness, Helen nodded. Our tactical simulations show that Krell ships are heavily armed but poorly defended. They've never needed strong armor because their enemies always break before it becomes relevant. If we can survive the initial exchange, we have a chance. Richard looked at the holographic display of the Krell Empire. 40 star systems marked in red. Somewhere in that vast territory, 5,000 humans were enslaved, suffering, dying. Every day that passed meant more deaths. Every hour of delay meant more pain. How long until the fleet is ready? 3 months for full readiness, Helen said. 2 months if we cut some corners on testing. 1 month if we skip testing entirely and just hope everything works. Richard thought about the bodies Danny had seen in the waste systems of Drakkar Prime. Thought about families torn apart. People worked to death. The casual cruelty of an empire that saw humans as nothing more than tools. 2 months, he said. Cut the corners you need to cut, but make sure the ships will actually fly and fight. We're no good to our people if we break down halfway there. The war room fell silent as everyone absorbed the timeline. 2 months to prepare. Then they would be going into the unknown, facing an enemy that had ruled unopposed for 3,000 years, fighting a battle they could not afford to lose. Counselor Patricia Moore entered the war room. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady. My son was on the Meridian. Lieutenant Daniel Moore. He was going to help set up the colony's communication network. He was 23 years old. I'm sorry, Richard said quietly. Don't be sorry. Just bring them home. Bring all of them home, or make the Krell pay so dearly that they wish they had never heard of humanity. Richard saluted. We'll do both. As Patricia left, Richard turned back to the holographic display. 2 months to prepare. Then they would learn if humanity's determination and innovation could overcome the Krell's experience and numbers. They would learn if 5,000 lives could be saved, or if they would only be adding more bodies to the count. Either way, the Krell were about to learn something important. They had enslaved the wrong species. Humanity did not break. They bent, they adapted, they survived. And when they were pushed too far, they pushed back. The collar around Jacob's neck was cold metal. The work was brutal. The pain was constant. But deep in the minds of Drakkar Prime, in the medical wings and waste systems and dark corners where the Krell did not bother to look, humanity was getting ready to remind the universe of an important lesson. Never mistake patience for weakness. The uprising began at midnight station time, when the Krell reduced their guard shifts to minimum numbers. Greg Murphy stood in the dead zone of Sector 12, surrounded by 100 humans who had quietly slipped away from their barracks. They carried mining tools, stolen weapons, and 3 months of rage. Remember the plan, Greg said quietly. 3 teams, 3 control stations, all at the same time. We disable the collar controls first, then we take the armory. If we can hold the central mine complex for even a few hours, it might be enough to get a message out. Jacob stood next to him, gripping a heavy mining drill that could double as a weapon. And if we can't hold it? Then we die free instead of living as slaves. The words hung in the air for a moment. Then someone in the back said, better than what we've got now. The agreement rippled through the group. These were colonists, farmers, engineers, teachers, people who had signed up to build a new world, not to fight a war. But the Krell had given them no choice. 3 months of brutality had turned ordinary humans into something dangerous. At exactly midnight, all 3 teams moved. Greg's team hit Control Station Alpha with brutal efficiency. The Krell guards were not expecting resistance. They had controlled slaves for 3,000 years and none had ever fought back with real organization. That complacency cost them their lives. The fighting was close and ugly. Humans died, but the Krell died too. When the last guard fell, Greg smashed the collar control panel with a mining tool. Throughout the complex, thousands of collars went dead. Across the facility, Linda's team seized the medical wing. She had spent months building her network, identifying every human who worked in positions of access. When the uprising began, they were ready. The medical wing had advanced Krell technology, including a long-range communication array. Linda knew how to use it. Her hands flew across the alien controls, trying to remember everything she had learned by watching Krell technicians. Come on, she whispered. Come on, work. The array powered up with a hum. Linda quickly entered coordinates that she hoped would reach beyond the system, toward human space. She had no idea if anyone would hear the message. She had no idea if Earth even knew what had happened to the Meridian, but she had to try. This is Dr. Linda Pierce of the colony ship Meridian. We are prisoners on the planet Drakkar Prime. The Krell Empire has enslaved us. We are fighting back. If you can hear this, if Earth can hear this, we need help. We are dying here, please. If you're coming, come now. She set the message to repeat and then grabbed a stolen weapon. The medical wing would not stay secure for long. Amy Pierce was 16 years old. She should have been starting her life on a new colony world, maybe learning to farm or studying to be a teacher. Instead, she was fighting for her life in a waste processing center. The center controlled power distribution for an entire sector of the facility. If the rebellion could hold it, they could keep the lights on and the systems running. If they lost it, the Krell could shut down everything and starve them out. Amy and her team had barricaded the main entrance and disabled the secondary access points. Now they waited, weapons ready, knowing that the Krell would come eventually. The attack came faster than expected. Krell soldiers hit the barricade with energy weapons that burned through metal like paper. Amy fired back with a stolen rifle, her hands shaking but her aim steady enough. Next to her, a man named Peter fell with a hole burned through his chest. "Hold the line," someone shouted. Amy did not know who. Everyone was shouting now, a mix of fear and determination and rage. The Krell kept coming. For everyone that fell, 2 more appeared. They were professional soldiers, trained and equipped for war. The humans were colonists with stolen weapons and pure desperation, but desperation can be a powerful weapon too. In the central command post, Greg watched holographic displays showing the battle across the facility. The rebellion was holding, but barely. They had freed the collar controls. They had seized key positions, but the Krell were responding now, and the response was brutal. "Orbital defense platforms are targeting our positions," someone reported. "They're willing to kill their own people to stop us." Jacob looked at the displays, his mind racing. "Can we access the planetary shield generators?" "Maybe. The codes would be in the main computer, but that's heavily guarded." "Everything's heavily guarded," Greg said. "Doesn't mean we can't take it." Amy's team was down to half strength when a massive explosion blew out the barricade. Krell soldiers poured through and the fighting became hand-to-hand. Amy swung her rifle like a club, hitting a Krell in its scaled face, then dove for cover as energy blasts filled the air. She was going to die here. They all were. But at least they were dying on their feet. Then the Krell stopped advancing, stopped fighting. One of them was looking at a communication device, its yellow eyes widening in what might have been shock. The Krell soldiers retreated suddenly, leaving the humans confused and bleeding but alive. "What just happened?" someone asked. Amy crawled to where Peter had fallen and gently closed his eyes. "I don't know, but something changed." In orbit above Drakkar Prime, 40 Krell warships detected massive energy signatures at the edge of the system. Sensors showed ships appearing from faster-than-light travel, dozens of them, moving at combat speed toward the planet. The Krell fleet commander, a veteran named Krellix, studied the readings with confusion. These were human ships, smaller than Krell vessels, but moving with obvious military purpose. Intel had said that humans were a new species, barely capable of space travel, certainly not a military threat. Intel was wrong. "All ships combat formation," Krellix ordered. "These humans clearly don't understand what they're facing. We'll destroy them quickly and return to suppressing the slave rebellion." The human fleet was led by a ship called the Retribution, and it was commanded by a man who had been preparing for this moment for 3 months. Admiral Richard Cole watched the Krell formation on his displays and allowed himself a small, cold smile. "All ships, battle pattern Delta, target their command vessels first. Show them what happens when you take our people." The 2 fleets raced toward each other across the dark between worlds. Commander Helen Brooks commanded the Vanguard, 5 destroyers that moved like dancers through space. Her ships were smaller and faster than the Krell cruisers, and she used that advantage ruthlessly. Her destroyers split formation, coming at the Krell from 3 directions at once. The Krell tried to track them all, their weapons swinging to cover multiple targets. They were too slow. Helen's ship struck from the side, targeting engines and weapon systems, crippling without destroying. Lieutenant Paul Martinez unleashed the mass drivers. The weapons fired projectiles accelerated to tremendous speeds, and when they hit Krell shields, they went straight through. The shields were designed to stop energy weapons, not physical objects moving at relativistic velocities. 3 Krell cruisers exploded in the first minutes of combat. On Drakkar Prime, Greg watched the battle unfold on captured Krell displays. The orbital bombardment had stopped. The Krell were too busy fighting for their lives to worry about slaves. "Earth came," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "They actually came for us." Linda heard the message over the communication array and started crying. 3 months of suffering, of watching people die, of wondering if anyone knew or cared what had happened to them. And now Earth's fleet was here fighting for them. "Mom?" Amy's voice came through the facility's communication system. "Mom, can you see it? Can you see them?" "I see them, baby. I see them. Just hold on a little longer." In space, the battle raged. Human ships died, their crews sacrificing themselves to protect the fleet. The destroyer Valiant took a direct hit and broke apart. The cruiser Defiant lost power and was finished by Krell weapons. But for every human ship that fell, 3 Krell vessels were destroyed or disabled. Richard's tactical innovations were working. The Krell had never faced an enemy that fought like this, that refused to surrender, that turned every disadvantage into a weapon. The Krell flagship tried to ram the Retribution, a last desperate move to salvage the battle. Richard waited until the last moment, then released every torpedo his ship carried and ordered emergency thrust. The Krell flagship, 5 times larger than the Retribution, broke apart in a cascade of explosions. Its commander, Fleet Master Krellix, died without understanding how his superior force had been defeated. The remaining Krell ships tried to retreat. Richard gave the order he had been waiting 3 months to give. Pursue and destroy. No survivors. The human fleet hunted down every Krell ship. It took hours, but when it was done, not a single Krell vessel remained intact. The battle had cost Richard 21 ships, thousands of lives. But they had won. On the planet below, the Krell planetary commander received the news. His fleet was gone. His orbital defenses were disabled. Human ships held space above his world. He faced a choice, surrender or die. He chose to fight. He ordered his remaining forces to execute all human prisoners and prepare for a ground war. Jacob heard the order come through on captured Krell communications. They're going to kill everyone. Everyone not in the secured areas. Greg grabbed his weapon. Then we fight, all of us. To the last person if we have to. But Richard had been listening to Krell communications too. The moment the execution order came through, he acted. The news of Drakkar Prime's fall spread through the Krell Empire like wildfire. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Krell had suffered total defeat. An entire fleet destroyed, a world liberated, and the slaves who should have died quietly had instead fought back and won. The Krell High Council met in emergency session on their throne world of Krellos. The council chamber was ancient, its walls decorated with the symbols of 40 conquered species. Those species had all submitted to Krell rule eventually. Surely these humans would be no different. High Counselor Draxon stood before his peers, his scales darkening with concern. We underestimated them. The humans are more dangerous than we thought. Perhaps we should negotiate, establish borders, avoid further conflict. The other counselors erupted in outrage. Counselor Thrask, a war leader who had commanded fleets for 50 years, slammed his clawed hand on the table. Negotiate with slaves, with prey? You dishonor yourself in this council. We will mobilize the full might of the Empire and crush these humans before this rebellion spreads. The vote was unanimous except for Draxon. The Krell Empire would go to total war. 5,000 warships would be assembled. Enough force to sweep humanity from the galaxy. The humans would learn their place or they would learn to die. On Earth, Richard Cole returned to a hero's welcome. Parades in every major city. Medals and honors, speeches from politicians celebrating humanity's great victory. But Richard felt no joy. He had seen the prison camps on Drakkar Prime. He knew what was coming. The United Earth Council gathered to hear his report. Richard stood before them, still wearing his uniform stained from the battle, and told them the truth without sugarcoating it. We won one battle. The Krell Empire has thousands of ships in 40 worlds. They're not going to stop because we rescued one group of colonists. They're going to come at us with everything they have, and we're not ready. Counselor Patricia Moore, whose son had been among the dead found on Drakkar Prime, spoke up. How long do we have? 6 months if we're lucky. 3 if we're not. The freed prisoners brought intelligence about Krell capabilities. They outgun us, they outnumber us, and they have 3,000 years of military experience. Our only advantages are desperation and the fact that they're not used to enemies who fight back. Then what do you propose? Asked another counselor. Richard took a deep breath. Total mobilization. Every shipyard, every factory, every resource focused on building our fleet. We need at least 200 warships to have any chance, and we need them in 3 months. The council approved the plan. Earth's economy shifted overnight. Civilian production stopped. Entertainment industries shut down. Everything that could be converted to military production was converted. Humanity was going to war, and there would be no half measures. 3 months later, the Krell proved Richard right. A fleet of 300 warships arrived at New Terra, humanity's second-largest colony. 2 million people called New Terra home, and the planet's defense force consisted of 40 newly built human ships. Captain Jennifer Bailey commanded the defense fleet. She was young for the position, only 32, but she had trained under Richard's personal supervision. She knew her orders: hold as long as possible, evacuate as many civilians as possible, and do not surrender. The battle was a massacre. Human ships fought with desperate courage, but they were simply overwhelmed. The Krell had learned from Drakkar Prime. They came in greater numbers, used more cautious tactics, and focused their fire to destroy human vessels quickly. Jennifer's ship, the Defiant Hope, took hit after hit. Her shields failed. Her hull breached in a dozen places, her crew dying around her. With her last working weapon, she targeted a Krell cruiser and rammed it at full speed. Both ships exploded together. 38 of 40 human ships were destroyed in 4 hours. New Terra's orbital defenses were shattered, but the sacrifice bought time for the evacuation transports to escape. 2 million civilians fled to Earth, saved by the crews who gave their lives to protect them. Richard led the evacuation personally, his ship Retribution serving as rear guard. The Krell hammered his vessel with everything they had, but Richard refused to leave until the last transport was away. The Retribution limped back to Earth with 2/3 of her crew dead, her hull held together by emergency patches, her weapons burnt out from constant firing. The loss of New Terra shook human morale. The Council began discussing surrender. Perhaps the Krell would accept humanity as a subject species instead of destroying them completely. Richard stood before the Council again, this time with his arm in a sling and burns covering half his face. Surrender means extinction. The Krell don't negotiate with those they consider inferior. Our only choice is to fight even if every human world burns, because at least then we'll die free. Patricia Moore stood with him. Admiral Cole is right. We've seen what Krell slavery looks like. Death is better than that. For us and for our children. The debate continued for hours, but finally the Council voted. Humanity would continue the war. And more than that, they would take the fight to the enemy. Patricia proposed the strategy that would define the rest of the war. We can't defend all our worlds against the Krell's numbers. So we don't defend. We attack. We strike at the heart of their empire, force them to pull back their fleets to defend their own worlds. It was madness. It was suicidal. It was also the only chance they had. Richard was given command of a strike force, 120 ships, half of humanity's operational fleet. The other half would protect Earth and the remaining colonies. It was a desperate gamble, but Earth was full of desperate people now. The target was Krellos, the Krell throne world. The symbolic and military heart of an empire that had ruled for 3 millennia. If humanity could strike there, could hurt the Krell in their home, it might change everything. The fleet prepared for departure. Richard spent his last night on Earth visiting the memorial, where 3,000 names were inscribed. The crew of the Defiant Hope and the other ships lost at New Terra. He placed his hand on Jennifer Bailey's name and made a silent promise. We'll make them pay for this. For you, for everyone. They wanted blood. They'll drown in it. The journey to Krellos took 3 weeks. Along the way, Richard made a controversial decision. He began broadcasting on every frequency, messages aimed at the slave populations on Krell-controlled worlds. This is Admiral Richard Cole of Earth. The Krell enslaved our people. We fought back, we won. Now we're coming for their home world. If you're a slave of the Krell Empire, you don't have to stay one. Fight back, rise up. We'll show you how. The broadcasts were crude, often poorly translated, sometimes barely coherent. But they worked. Rebellions began erupting across the Krell Empire. On mining worlds and factory planets, on research stations and agricultural centers, slaves rose up against their masters. The Krell were forced to divert fleets to suppress the uprisings. Their attention fragmented. Their forces spread thin, and through the chaos, Richard's fleet moved toward Krellos like an arrow aimed at the heart. The Krell High Council received reports of the approaching human fleet with disbelief. Surely the humans wouldn't be foolish enough to attack the throne world itself. Surely they understood that Krellos was defended by 500 warships. But 200 of those ships were away, dealing with slave rebellions. And the humans were coming anyway. High Counselor Draxon stood before the council again. We should evacuate. Move the government to a secure location until we can assemble enough force to defend properly. Evacuate. Thrask's voice was filled with contempt. Run from humans. We have 300 ships here. They have barely 100. We will crush them and mount their commander's head on the council chamber wall. When the human fleet arrived at Krellos, they found 200 Krell ships waiting. The rest were scattered across the system, unable to reposition in time. Richard had timed his attack perfectly, and now the Krell would pay for their arrogance. All ships, Richard broadcast to his fleet. These people took our children. They enslaved our friends. They killed thousands of us and thought we would just accept it. Show them what humanity does to tyrants. Show them what happens when you mistake our patience for weakness. The Battle of Krelos began. It was the largest space battle in recorded history. 200 Krell warships against 120 human vessels, fighting in orbit of a planet that had ruled an empire for 3,000 years. The battle would last 18 hours and change the galaxy forever. Richard's fleet fought with everything they had learned, every tactic, every innovation, every desperate trick. Human ships moved in coordinated strike groups, their crews operating with the precision born of desperation and training. Commander Helen Brooks led her destroyers in a suicidal run against the Krell orbital platforms. Her squadron took devastating losses, but they cleared the way for the main fleet to close with the Krell warships. Lieutenant Paul Martinez commanded the bombardment wing. While the fleets fought in orbit, his ships rained fire on Krelos itself, not on cities or civilians, but on symbols of power. The High Council chambers, military headquarters, the monuments celebrating 3,000 years of Krell dominance. The Krell fought back with fury born of desperation. They were defending their homeworld, their history, their very identity. But fury without skill is just noise. High Counselor Draxon huddled in the emergency bunker beneath Krelos, listening to Admiral Cole's message echo through the communication systems. Around him, the other council members sat in shocked silence. For 3,000 years, the Krell had ruled without challenge. Now their capital burned and their fleet was destroyed by slaves they had captured only 6 months ago. "We must respond," Thrask said, his voice shaking with rage and fear. "We must make them pay for this humiliation." Draxon looked at him with something close to pity. "With what?" "Our fleet is gone. Our orbital defenses are destroyed. And even if we had ships, there are rebellions on half our worlds. The Empire is coming apart, then we rebuild. We regroup. We show every species in the galaxy what happens when you defy the Krell." "No." Draxon stood, his decision made. "We negotiate. We end this before there's nothing left to save." The council erupted in argument, but Draxon ignored them. He opened a communication channel to the human fleet above. "Admiral Cole, this is High Counselor Draxon. I wish to discuss terms of surrender." On the Retribution, Richard listened to the Krell's words with a cold expression. His crew cheered, thinking the war was over. But Richard knew better. He had seen too much, lost too much, learned too much about what the Krell Empire really was. "Counselor Draxon, I'll hear your terms. We will release all human prisoners. We will recognize human sovereignty over your claimed territories. We will withdraw all Krell forces from human space and establish a neutral zone between our civilizations. In exchange, you will cease hostilities and allow the Krell Empire to maintain our remaining territories." It was a generous offer by any standard. Humanity would be free, their people returned, their space secure. Most of Richard's officers expected him to accept immediately. Richard's response surprised them all. "Not enough. Your empire is built on slavery. How many species have you conquered? How many worlds have you subjugated? How many billions have suffered under Krell rule? Humanity will accept nothing less than the complete liberation of every slave in your empire." Draxon's voice took on a desperate edge. "That would mean the end of the Krell Empire. We cannot accept those terms. Then the war continues, and we will burn every Krell world until you accept them, or until there are no Krell left to refuse." Richard cut the communication and turned to his fleet. "All ships begin orbital bombardment of military targets. Show them we're serious." The bombardment lasted for an hour, just long enough to reduce every military installation on Krelos to rubble. Then Richard waited. He knew the Krell would respond eventually. The question was whether they would choose survival or pride. On Earth, humanity followed the events at Krelos with desperate hope. The war had cost them so much already. 2 colonies abandoned, new Terra lost, hundreds of thousands dead. But they had also proven something important. They had proven that humanity could fight and win against impossible odds. The broadcasts Richard had sent to slave populations across the Krell Empire continued to bear fruit. Rebellion spread like wildfire. Species that had been conquered centuries ago suddenly remembered what freedom tasted like. The Krell Empire, weakened by the loss of their fleet and the destruction of their capital, could not contain them all. On a mining world called Theron, Slaves of a species called the Ventari rose up and seized control from their Krell overseers. On the factory planet Drexus, 4 different species coordinated their rebellion, overwhelming the Krell garrison through sheer numbers. On research stations and agricultural centers, on prison worlds and military outposts, the Empire burned. The Krell tried to respond, but their forces were scattered, their leadership in disarray, their confidence shattered. For 3,000 years they had been the predators. Now they were learning what it felt like to be prey. Linda Pierce had returned to Earth after the liberation of Drakkar Prime. She spent her time coordinating with the newly freed species, helping them establish their own governments, teaching them the tactics humans had used to resist. She became a symbol of hope for slaves across the galaxy. Greg Murphy joined the military formally, training other humans in ground combat and resistance tactics. He led missions to other Krell-held worlds, helping local populations fight for their freedom. Every world he helped liberate felt like justice for the 3 months he had spent in chains. Amy Pierce, now 17, joined the diplomatic corps despite her mother's concerns. She had survived slavery and rebellion. She was not going to waste that experience sitting safely on Earth. She became one of humanity's primary contacts with the freed species, her youth and earnestness making her surprisingly effective. 6 months after the Battle of Krelos, the Krell Empire was fractured beyond repair. 40 worlds had become 400 independent systems. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were building their own civilizations. The Krell themselves were confined to a handful of core systems, their fleets destroyed, their empire reduced to history. High Counselor Draxon contacted Richard again. This time there was no pride in his voice, only exhaustion. Admiral Cole, I am authorized to accept your terms. All slaves will be freed. The Krell Empire will be dissolved. We will submit to whatever restrictions you impose on our military forces. Just please end this. There has been enough death. Richard consulted with the United Earth Council, with the freed species, with everyone who had suffered under Krell rule. The consensus was clear. The Krell had started this war through their cruelty and arrogance. They would end it on humanity's terms. The Treaty of Earth was signed 2 years after the Meridian was captured. The terms were harsh but fair. All slave species were granted immediate freedom. The Krell were restricted to their core systems, their military limited to defensive forces only. War reparations would be paid to every species that had suffered under their rule, and most importantly, any Krell attempt to rebuild their empire would be met with immediate military response from the coalition of freed species. The war had cost humanity dearly. 53 billion credits in debt, 12 colony worlds damaged or destroyed, hundreds of thousands dead, but they had survived. More than that, they had freed an empire. Richard Cole retired from military service the day the treaty was signed. He had done what he set out to do. The people of the Meridian were avenged. The Krell Empire was broken. Humanity was safe. He returned to civilian life quietly, refusing parades and medals and speeches. He had seen too much death for celebration. But he did attend one ceremony that mattered to him. The memorial on Earth grew larger after the war. Alongside the 3,000 names from New Terra and the hundreds from Drakkar Prime, new names were added. Everyone who had died fighting for freedom, human and alien alike. The memorial became a place of pilgrimage where freed species came to honor those who made their liberation possible. Linda and Amy attended the ceremony together. Linda placed flowers at the wall where the names of Drakkar Prime's dead were inscribed. 5,000 had been taken from the Meridian. Fewer than 2,000 survived to see freedom. The rest were gone, their bodies disposed of in the Krell waste systems or left in unmarked graves. Do you think it was worth it? Amy asked her mother. All the death, all the suffering? Linda thought about the question carefully. I think we didn't have a choice. The Krell made the choice for us when they decided we were things instead of people. But yes, it was worth it. Look around, Amy looked. The ceremony was attended by hundreds of species. The Ventari, who had been slaves for 200 years. The Drixari, conquered 600 years ago and nearly extinct from harsh treatment. The Theron, the Kellys, the Margon. Dozens of species that had nearly forgotten what freedom meant. They were all free now because humanity had refused to stay slaves. Because Jacob Hayes sent a desperate message before he was captured. Because Greg Murphy organized resistance in the mines. Because Linda stole medical supplies and built a network. Because Amy held a power station against impossible odds. Because Richard Cole brought Earth's fleet into hell and fought until the demons broke. A representative from the Ventari approached them, a tall being with blue skin and gentle eyes. Dr. Pierce, we wanted to thank you. Your people freed us. They taught us to fight. They showed us that the strong are not always right. Linda smiled sadly. The strong are not always right, but the right are always strongest in the end. That's what the Krell never understood. They had power, but we had purpose. That made all the difference. The memorial stood as a reminder not just of human sacrifice, but of a fundamental truth the Krell learned too late. That cruelty creates courage in the desperate. That tyranny plants the seeds of its own destruction. That thrones built on suffering will always be overthrown by those whose suffering built them. Years passed. The freed species built their own civilizations. Some thrived, some struggled, but all of them were free to make their own choices. The Krell remained in their core systems, diminished but not destroyed, a reminder of what happened when power was used without wisdom. Humanity grew carefully, mindful of the lessons learned. They built new colonies but never forgot what it felt like to be powerless. They developed powerful militaries but never used them for conquest. They became guardians rather than rulers, protectors rather than conquerors. Jacob Hayes did not live to see the end of the war. 20 years had passed since the Treaty of Earth was signed. The galaxy looked nothing like it had before humanity encountered the Krell. Where once there was one empire dominating 40 systems, now there were dozens of independent civilizations, each finding their own path forward. On Earth, in a quiet apartment overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Amy Pierce sat at her desk reviewing reports from across known space. She was 37 now, a senior diplomat and coordinator for the Coalition of Free Worlds, the organization formed by the species liberated from Krell rule. Her daughter, Rachel, came into the room carrying 2 cups of tea. At 15, she was the same age Amy had been during the uprising on Drakkar Prime. But Rachel had grown up in a time of peace, knowing slavery only from history books and her mother's careful stories. Mom, there's a transmission from the Ventari homeworld. They're asking if you can attend their Liberation Day ceremony next month. Amy smiled. Tell them yes. I wouldn't miss it for anything. Rachel set down the tea and looked at the wall of her mother's office. It was covered with photographs, images of humans and aliens working together, building new cities, establishing new governments. In the center was an old picture from the Meridian, taken before the Krell came. Amy's mother, Linda, stood with a young Amy, both of them smiling, full of hope for their new life on New Terra. Do you ever regret it? Rachel asked. Everything that happened? If you could go back and warn the Meridian not to make that journey, would you? Amy considered the question. She still had nightmares about the waste processing center, about the fighting, about Peter dying next to her. The scars on her arm from a Krell energy weapon ached when it rained. But she looked at the reports on her desk, updates from worlds that were free because of what happened. No, I wouldn't change it. The cost was terrible, but the alternative was worse. The Krell Empire would still be enslaving people. Billions would still be suffering. What happened to us, what happened to the Meridian, it mattered. On the Krell homeworld of Krellos, a much different scene played out. The planet had been rebuilt in the years since the war, but it was smaller now, humbler. The monuments to past conquests were gone, replaced by memorials to the fallen and museums dedicated to ensuring the mistakes of the past were never repeated. Former High Counselor Draxon was now simply Draxon, an old Krell who spent his days teaching history at the university. He stood before a class of young Krell students, most of them born after the war, and told them stories they needed to hear but did not want to believe. Your ancestors were not heroes. We were tyrants. We conquered dozens of species and told ourselves it was our right because we were strong. We enslaved billions and called it necessary. We killed without mercy and called it justice. A student raised his hand, but we were the most advanced species. The most powerful. Doesn't that mean something? Draxon's expression was sad. It meant we had more responsibility, not fewer. Power without wisdom is just destruction waiting to happen. We learned that lesson too late, and it cost us everything. He pulled up holographic images of the war, the Battle of Drakkar Prime, the bombardment of Krellos, the faces of Krell soldiers who died fighting to preserve an empire built on suffering. The humans did not defeat us with superior technology or greater numbers. They defeated us with something we had forgotten. They fought for something beyond themselves. They fought for freedom, for dignity, for the right to exist as people instead of property. And when given the choice between saving only themselves or freeing everyone, they chose everyone. Another student spoke up. Why? Why would they care about other species? Because they understood something we never did. That suffering matters no matter who experiences it. That cruelty is wrong no matter who commits it. That power is a responsibility, not a license. The lesson ended and the students filed out quietly. Draxon remained in the empty classroom, looking at images of the empire that had been. He had voted against the war. He had tried to negotiate, but he had not tried hard enough, had not fought hard enough against the Council's arrogance. That failure haunted him. On the mining world of Theron, the Ventari had built a thriving civilization in the decades since liberation. Where there had been slave barracks, now there were homes. Where there had been mines worked by the dying, now there were schools and hospitals and parks. A monument stood in the central square depicting a human and a Ventari standing together, breaking chains. The inscription was simple: to those who taught us that freedom is worth any price. The Ventari leader, a woman named Kalara, spoke at the Liberation Day ceremony. Thousands gathered to hear her words, and the ceremony was broadcast across the coalition of free worlds. 20 years ago, we were slaves. We had been slaves for 200 years, so long that some of us had forgotten what freedom even meant. We believed the Krell when they told us we were inferior. We believed them when they said we deserved our chains. She paused, looking out at the crowd, young Ventari who had never known slavery, old ones who still bore the scars. Then humanity came. They did not come to save us at first. They came to save their own people. But when they had the chance to make peace and secure only their own freedom, they refused. Admiral Cole told the Krell that freedom was not negotiable, that every slave in the Empire would be freed or the war would continue. Kalara's voice grew stronger. Humanity could have accepted peace, could have saved themselves and left the rest of us to our fate. But they chose to fight on, to risk everything, for us, for people they had never met, species they had just learned existed. In the crowd, former slaves wept, not from sadness but from gratitude and the memory of that moment, when they realized the chains were truly broken. We must never forget what we owe them, not just freedom but the lesson they taught us, that we must stand against tyranny wherever we find it, that we must protect the weak, not exploit them. That power comes with responsibility. Amy watched the ceremony through a video link from Earth. She saw the Ventari celebrating, saw children who would grow up free, saw a civilization building something beautiful from the ashes of slavery. It made the nightmares worth it. Rachel watched with her mother, trying to understand what it must have been like. They really look up to humanity, don't they? They look up to the idea of humanity, Amy corrected. The idea that people should help each other, that freedom matters more than power, that the right thing is more important than the easy thing. We're not special because we're human. We're special because when given a choice, we chose right. On a station orbiting the former Krell research world of Drexus, representatives from 50 species gathered for the Coalition Summit. The Coalition had grown beyond anyone's expectations, becoming a force for stability and cooperation across the galaxy. Greg Murphy attended as humanity's military advisor. He was 54 now, his hair gray but his body still strong from years of training. He stood before the assembly and gave his report on the state of Coalition defense forces. Our combined fleets number 2,000 ships, drawn from 30 species. We train together, we plan together, we stand together. But we must never forget why this coalition exists. Not to conquer, not to dominate, but to ensure that what happened under Krell rule never happens again. A representative from the Drexari species asked a question. Commander Murphy, there are species beyond our borders who still practice slavery. Should we intervene? Greg's answer was careful. We should not become the new Krell, imposing our values through force. But we should make it clear that slavery will not be tolerated within Coalition space, and any species that wishes to join us must abandon such practices. We lead by example, not by conquest. The summit continued for 3 days, discussing trade, defense, cultural exchange, and the 1,000 details of maintaining peace between species that were still learning to trust each other. It was not perfect, but it worked, and that was enough. Back on Earth, the Meridian Museum received thousands of visitors each year, students on field trips, veterans of the war, aliens from across the Coalition who wanted to see where it all began. The curator was an elderly man named Stephen Kane. He had been part of the Meridian's engineering crew, one of the survivors of Drakkar Prime. He spent his days showing people through the ship, telling stories about the people who had lived there. A group of young Krell visited one day students from Draxon's history class. They walked through the ship quietly, looking at the displays showing life before the capture. Families preparing for a new world, children playing in the recreation areas, people full of hope. Then they saw the displays about the slavery, the prison camps, the death tolls, the evidence of what their ancestors had done. One of the young Krell, a girl named Serena, stood in front of a wall listing the dead. 3,000 names from the Meridian alone. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know it doesn't matter that I wasn't born yet, but I'm sorry this happened." Stephen came to stand beside her. He had every reason to hate the Krell. He had spent 3 months as their slave. He had watched friends die. He bore scars that still hurt after 20 years. But when he looked at this young Krell student with tears in her eyes, he saw not an enemy but a child trying to understand her people's sins. "Your sorrow matters," he said gently, "not because you're responsible for what happened,